Good afternoon. Welcome, dear partners, colleagues, participants, friends. A very good morning, very good afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the red session of the Venice City Solutions 2030. This session is organized by UN Habitat and is entitled The Vision for the Future, Strategic Planning and Imagining a Sustainable City. My name is Shipra Narang Suri. I'm the Chief of the Urban Practices Branch at UN Habitat, based in sunny Nairobi, see, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this discussion today. First of all, a bit of housekeeping. Simultaneous translation is available in English, French, Italian, and Spanish for this session. You will see the translation button at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure many of us are zoomed out this year and are very familiar with these multiple platforms we use. But you will see a little globe which says interpretation at the bottom of your screen. And when you click on it, you can choose the language you wish to hear for this session. We're going to have two panels in this session. I will come to those in a second, but we will have a Q&A. We will open the floor for questions after each panel. You're very welcome to type your questions in the chat. We will select some of them and invite you to take the floor in case you have access to the camera. If you wish to be invited to take the floor, I would advise you to keep your questions short and sweet. Very important, please remember to turn off the interpretation before you speak, because otherwise the language channels get mixed up and it makes it very difficult. It garbles the interpretation, makes it very difficult to understand. So when you take the floor, this is for all the speakers and those who are speaking from the floor. Please remember to turn off your interpretation. This session is being broadcasted live through the Venice City Solutions YouTube channel and will also be available there later on for viewing afterwards. It will be recorded and be available there. The session is divided into two dialogues, each with three speakers, and in between there will be a short intermezzo with my colleague from UN Habitat, who will give us a short presentation on the SDG Cities program, but I will come to that in a second. That said, let me start formally by thanking the co-organizing partners of the Venice City Solutions 2030, especially AICC-RE. I discovered it's a very long name, the Italian Association for Council of Municipalities and Regions of Europe, as well as United Cities and Local Governments, of course, UCLG, UNDP, and the SDG campaign. Thank you for your partnership, your collaboration. More importantly, thank you for your tireless work in this very challenging year. Very much appreciated. Since 2018, the Venice City Solutions has been a unique space for creative thinking around the local implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm glad we're all gathered here to celebrate the third edition of the Venice City Solutions, despite the difficult times that this world is facing. I'm also excited that we're doing this in innovative ways. I think it's very important. The world has leapfrogged in some ways this year to very innovative online modes of engagement. And that is something to be appreciated, in fact. Today, we will discuss how we can imagine and craft cities of the future, a topic which today more than ever is of paramount importance in our efforts to recover and rebuild from the current crisis. The pandemic is first and foremost an urban crisis, with more than 90% of the cases in urban areas and an unprecedented recession of urban economies. How are we going to recover from this? How we are going to build back better will really depend on the response from cities and local and regional governments around the world. And what better place to do it than Venice? As our dear friend Emilia said in her inspiring introduction yesterday during the opening, let's think about what Venice means to us as a humanity, a place of resilience, a place of creativity, built on heritage, but always looking towards the future. The SDGs offer us the integrated and comprehensive framework to reimagine our cities and our way of living them. Today's discussion will explore two key dimensions of this envisioning process. The creation of a vision. First of all, we have a panel that will talk about how we envision a better future, how the SDGs can help us in envisioning the city we want. And the second panel will talk about the translation of this vision into reality. How do we make sure this vision is translated into concrete strategies, policies, initiatives, and of course, where does the funding come to give life to realize all of these aspirations? Um, we have three speakers on each panel. I will introduce them in a second. They will have 5 minutes each, so that we have a little time for discussion, Q&A after each panel. And in between, as I said, we will have a short presentation. Then we have the second panel, plays it out in the same way. It's an hour and a half for the session, but you'd be surprised how quickly an hour and a half goes when you have exciting speakers and a great discussion lined up. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists for our first panel discussion, The City We Want, Experiences in Envisioning the Cities of the Future. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Alvaro Blondel, the Executive Secretary, Municipality of La Paz in Bolivia. I believe he's just going to join us in a couple of seconds. Ms. Nuha Qtaish, Executive Director of Strategic Planning, Greater Amman Municipality, Jordan, and Mr. Dan Hill, who is the Director of Strategic Design, Vinnova, the Swedish innovation agency, obviously from Sweden. So while we wait for the Executive Secretary of La Paz, allow me to give the floor to Nuha Qtaish. Nuha, you're joining us very early in the morning today from Toronto. So Thank you very much for taking the time. The floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about what Amman is doing, what you are doing, taking into considerations the SDGs in envisioning the future of the city. Amman is, of course, a champion of sustainable development in the region. So I pass it to you, and I have noted that Mr. Blondel is online, so he will be our next speaker. Thank you very much. Nuha, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sherba. Thank you. Actually, I would like, on behalf of Amman City and myself, I'd like to thank UCLG and UN Habitat and partners and all the perpetrators for this event and make it a success story. So let's start sharing my slides with you. Amman, a livable city with a soul, and this 4 words vision statement for our city, and we are working hard to achieve this vision. Livable is sustainable, and the soul need to be in a good health, breathing a clean air. Next slide, please. Martino, yes. So let's have a quick look to my city. Amman is the capital city of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and it's lays over 800 square kilometers with 4 million population. That means that 40% of Jordan's population lives within this area. And regarding Syrian refugees, after the Syrian crisis, most of the refugees came to our kingdom, and 30% of Syrian refugees lives in our city. So that means that Amman is culturally diverse and also naturally diverse. Actually, from our logo down below, you can see that Amman lays over mountains, and our logo reflects that. And the colorful thing means the harmony and the multicultural are there. This map shows the zoned and unzoned areas and the built-up area. Actually, we can notice that 48% of all lands are zoned and regulated, and the rest is still unzoned with the blue color. And these dark spots are the built-up area, which accounts 37% of the total area. Next. Yes. Actually, part of our urban analysis through the pandemic period this year, Amman, like any other city, suffer from this pandemic and faces so many challenges, actually. So we need to have a new look or a new kind of analysis to our city. So we developed this 3-dimensional density map depending on our GIS data, census data 2019, and also NASA maps. And as you can see, you can imagine the density in our city. It's mainly located in the middle and eastern area, reached up to 48,000 inhabitants per square kilometers. And that's a big challenge, actually. These densified areas needs to be revisited and restudied again. Next, yes. And this is also parts of our new analysis to new urban analysis to the city, and the pandemic teaches us that there should be a new measures to look after your city and to have a new look at the neighborhood level, not only at the metropolitan level. So we use a toolbox developed by the Cityform Lab for Urban Network Analysis. Harvard, I think it's a collaboration between Harvard and MIT. So we need urgently to reanalyze our city at the neighborhood level and put in new measures for our new services. Reachability, to deliver service in a proper time when people need it. Our gravity maps, these maps are gravity maps, and we call it heat maps because they shows us the weakness in your city. So we use a measure of 600 meters, a walkability distance, to test our urban services. We mapped actually, or we test all our urban services, commercial shops, groceries, pharmacies, open spaces, medical centers, hospitals, and all the services that people need through the pandemic, or especially at the lockdown period. So by using this evidence-based approach, we promote integrated urban development in accordance with the 2030 agenda by providing policies for GAM through identifying weak areas, and that will be in compliance with SDG 16, strong institutions. Ensure social inclusiveness of our city by analyzing population density and reachability. So we overlaid our density maps with these reachability maps and also the infrastructure maps. So in a nutshell, access to the city for all and leave no one behind should be the main objective. Everyone should get the service in a proper way at the proper time.
Nuha, I'll have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Oh, okay. So the time passed quickly. So to achieve these SDGs 11s and 16s, these maps will be, and this kind of analysis will be very helpful. Next slide. Okay. And also through the lockdown, we're trying to touch the individual needs because the pandemic teaches us that individual matters and everyone should be happy and satisfied in his city and get all services at the proper time. So we distribute an e-survey through the lockdown area to test the accessibility and reachability for so many services and to see the walkability inside these neighborhoods. And we digitalize all these results and map them and overlay them over our reachability maps or the gravity maps. Okay, next slide. So as a result, our vision for the future is to enhance accessibility to urban services in compliance with SDG 11. And using these advanced tools and the new digital tools will be very helpful. And everyone should be happy in his city and get satisfied in his local neighborhood, not only in the entire city. And also, as just to need to mention that the city launched Amman Climate Action Plan, Green City Action Plan, and all are under implementation. Some projects actually are going on and others are waiting for funding, but everything is settled down and a new project is going on to achieve SDGs. So achieving SDGs and targeting a sustainable city is not an option anymore. This is the lesson we learned after the pandemic. Thank you, Sherba.
Thank you very much, Nuha. Very, 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 very valid and very important points that you just made. Individuals matter. I think that was a very, very important one for me. It's not just cities as a homogeneous entity, as a non-individualized entity. Individuals matter. I think that's very important. And all your action plans must speak to each other. That's another one. And I liked your new measurements, the urban network analysis, reachability index, redundancy index. I think we're really looking at important parameters for future resilience through this. So thank you very much for sharing that snapshot and that experience with us, Nuha. And stay with us. We might have some questions for you from the participants, of course. Moving on, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Mr. Alvaro Blondel, the Executive Secretary, Municipality of La Paz, Bolivia. Alvaro, La Paz was one of the first municipalities in Latin America to articulate its territorial development agenda with the SDGs as a framework. Tell us a little bit about the process that led to the definition of La Paz 2040, and how is it linked to the SDG agenda for La Paz municipality? You have the floor. I would appeal to you to keep to 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Hola, muy buenos días. Muchas gracias por el espacio, por la invitación. Un saludo desde una de las ciudades más altas del mundo, nuestra ciudad, La Paz del Cielo. Producto del modelo exitoso de la gestión institucional municipal, ya que estamos trabajando bajo una misma línea política de gobierno hace más de 20 años en el municipio de La Paz, y que ha permitido una institucionalidad muy fuerte desde un gobierno local, y que ha permitido demostrar en Bolivia de que realmente a partir de las ciudades, a partir de los gobiernos locales, se puede promover el desarrollo de las ciudades y generar políticas públicas significativas que transforman la calidad de vida de los ciudadanos en nuestro país. Es en este sentido que estos planes de desarrollo, en el caso de La Paz, ahora el plan La Paz 2040, La Paz que queremos, genera un proceso de planificación serio, sin improvisaciones y con un alto nivel de participación de la ciudadanía.
Can I please interrupt? Can you switch off your own interpretation, please? If you can switch off interpretation for yourself, then we can have simultaneous interpretation for the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Muy bien. Y en función a eso hemos generado una participación de más de 10,000 personas, que es significativo en un municipio que tiene una población de 1 millón de habitantes. Y asimismo, este plan responde de manera definitiva a desafíos y a problemáticas estructurales de nuestro municipio, como son el cambio climático, la escasez de agua, la contaminación, la seguridad alimentaria it's off my translation, sorry. De igual forma responde a los desafíos estructurales que se tienen en el municipio. Este plan consolida la planificación del desarrollo económico con el uso y ocupación del territorio, articulando el corto, el mediano y el largo plazo de lo que se tiene que hacer en nuestro municipio. Y en este marco, este instrumento es el tercer plan de desarrollo municipal de nuestra ciudad. Como decía, estos planes han dejado de ser instrumentos de estantería para ser instrumentos definitiva que orienten el trabajo de las autoridades y de las diferentes áreas organizacionales, y se convierte en el primer plan de ordenamiento territorial. Por otro lado, también es el primer plan de largo plazo de un municipio en todo Bolivia. Este instrumento también es una guía de transformaciones estructurales y estratégicas que tienen esta visión integral y una visión compartida con miras, reitero, al 2040, y que permiten, por supuesto, tener un norte, tener una guía de hacia dónde tenemos que ir y cómo vamos a encarar los principales problemas del municipio de La Paz. Por otro lado, el municipio de La Paz está enmarcado de manera definitiva en esta Agenda 2030 y por tanto, las metas de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible están relacionadas con varias de sus competencias municipales. Se estima que alrededor de del 63% de las metas de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible tienen relación directa con atribuciones y responsabilidades de los gobiernos locales en Bolivia. Y en ese marco, el municipio de La Paz pues ha respondido en más de 82% de acuerdo al alineamiento y al avance que se tiene, por ejemplo, en el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible de ciudades y comunidades sostenibles. Por otro lado, también de acuerdo a la evaluación, se tiene un débil alineamiento, por ejemplo, con el objetivo 9 de la industria, innovación, infraestructura, y también con el objetivo 12 de producción y consumo responsable. Por tanto, en esos objetivos es que tenemos que priorizar y fortalecer las intervenciones y acciones del municipio. Por otro lado, respecto al nivel multidimensional integral, tenemos la dimensión social, ambiental, con 71 y 64%, por ejemplo, de alineamiento. Respecto a las 5 P's de personas, planetas, prosperidad, paz y alianzas, tenemos un avance del 70% respecto al tema de paz, 69% respecto al tema de personas. La agenda de los...
ask you to wrap up, please.
Sorry?
I will have to ask you to wrap up kindly.
Ok. Bueno, para terminar, nuestro municipio está definitivamente trabajando en función al alineamiento, al tema de la participación, a los talleres, y en ese marco, pues las prioridades que tenemos están relacionadas a una vida saludable, a la movilidad urbana y sostenible y al trabajo decente. Por otro lado, también no hay que olvidar la crisis del COVID, que ha superado las expectativas sociales, las políticas económicas, y en ese marco, pues tenemos que también transformar. No olvidemos que el COVID vino para quedarse, y en ese marco tenemos que transformar y modificar todas las acciones y el proceso de planificación que tenemos desde nuestra ciudad. Muchísimas gracias. Un saludo a todos.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important that cities like La Paz are setting the tone by integrating or correlating SDG targets directly with their functions, with their departments, and with their existing plans and projects and responsibilities. So I think that's really that's an important takeaway and lesson for all of the other local governments who are also here in the session, but an important takeaway more generally. Thank you very much, Alvaro, and apologies for the confusion with the interpretation and all of that in the beginning. Let me move straight along to Dan Hill. Dan, you're the Director of Strategic Design at Vinnova, the Swedish innovation agency. In this decade of action, innovation is key to achieving the SDGs by 2030. Based on your experiences, could you tell us a little bit about innovative approaches to city planning that that have led to development of shared visions, particularly as Alvaro was talking about, for the future of cities? 5 minutes.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Shipra. Martino, if you can pull up my slides, please, that would be great. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit differently, perhaps. I don't know. I'm a designer by background, urban designer, interaction designer. I've worked on many city strategies, city visions, and so on. And rather than start with a picture of what the city is, or an understanding, a projection of the future or a scenario, what we're doing in Sweden is we're using mission-oriented innovation, really to pull that down to the ground and actually work from the street up, if you like, and then at the street level build mechanisms for co-creating the future together. So it's much more iterative and adaptive process led by citizens and businesses and public sector all working together in deep collaboration. So I call this the 1 minute city. If you go to the next slide, please, Martino. So here's the mission we have. We're looking at the street. The street, in a way, is the basic unit of cities, I'd argue. You sort of get buildings everywhere and you get all kinds of things everywhere else. But the street is a particularly urban thing, really. It's where systems converge. You all know what I mean by a street. Technically, we could have a long discussion about what it is, but instinctively, you know what I mean by it is. And we've built most of our streets in Sweden. I would say probably we have another 20% to build or something before 2050, but most of them have been built. So it's an existing infrastructure which we can address and retrofit and rework. There's something like 40,000 kilometers of street in Sweden. That's about 6 times the size of Paris. If you imagine holding Sweden in your hand and lifting the streets from it and holding the streets in the air, that's a kind of a significant infrastructure. And it's a very different way of addressing cities in that way. And we're trying to ensure that every street in Sweden becomes healthy, sustainable, and vibrant. And that would, of course, because of systems, have a knock-on effect on pretty much everything else in the city, one way or another, from democracy to buildings. Next slide, please, Martina. And so I'll just tell a story of how we've gone from a co-creation process on the left through to prototyping and scaling on the right there in the last year or so. Next slide, please. The first thing we've really done is we did co-creation sessions on the ground with what we call the system in the room. We talked to about 500 different organizations across Sweden in multiple cities. Here you see pictures from people from Ericsson, R&D, you see people from scooter startups, transport planners that are working together in the same room at the same time on the street itself. Next slide, please, Martino. From that, we kind of get these visions of what you could begin to do, retrofitting into the existing environments. These are kind of synthesis coming out of those sessions, very tangible and clear, I think. Next slide, please. And then we worked with Stockholm in the first instance and found some streets that they could donate with prototyping. These are streets, real streets in the middle of Stockholm next to schools, but you see they're pretty dead, to be honest. They're being used as car parking, which is the least valuable thing you can do with a street, I think. And so we wanted to explore what else you could do. Next slide. Because they were next to schools, we actually let the school children be the lead designers. So we gave them a kit of parts and let these 6-year-olds actually design what the street is about. This is a super local participative model. Whoever is in the street designs the street. So the residents and users of the street, they're the experts in this sense. They're the best people to actually do the design. So next slide, please. We also did this with the Prime Minister, by the way. That's the Prime Minister of Sweden on the left. I won't tell you who was better at this exercise, him or the kids. Moving on, please, Martino. These are the kind of things that come out of the kids, though, as you can imagine, fake palms, because in Sweden we don't have real palms, unlike some of the people on the call here. Playgrounds, swing sets, chairs. Next slide, please. And then we translated those into a modular, adaptable kit of parts that could build in parking spaces. So these are kind of parking space size. This is borrowing tactical urbanism techniques. Next slide. So that becomes a kind of library, a kit of parts, which then deployed into the streets. These are made from Swedish timber, so they're wooden. They're changing the landscape of the streets. They have multiple applications defined by the citizens themselves. Next slide, please. And the next, you see playgrounds and swings and how they fit into the street and begin to soften the space. Next slide, please. Just keep moving through this, Martina, thank you. Scooter sharing, bike sharing, greenery can start coming in. And again, the applications are designed by the citizens. So we're building a library. The state is effectively holding a kit of parts, like an open source library. The street decides what happens there. Next slide, please. How it links to the SDGs, we have a complex value model underneath that. So this is all these little bits of white text, or bits of research which show the value generated by these single interventions: physical activity, biodiversity. Next slide, please, Martina. So, and so all of those are linked to SDGs. All of that research exists. All of it sits in silos. The biodiversity people never talk to the social fabric people, never talk to the commercial people, and so on. These interventions, because they're systemic, bring it all together. And then if you don't speak Swedish, there's no reason why you would. What this says is the reaction so far, we've done 300 surveys on these 4 different sets of prototypes out in the streets, 70 to 75% positive. About the changes, which is kind of amazing given we're taking car parking away. Usually I get death threats when you take car parking away. In this case, we're getting hugely positive results, which is nice. And much more call for more greenery, more conviviality, social spaces, and so on. Next slide, please. And how does this stop being just prototypes and one-offs? Well, this is why the state using tactical urbanism is interesting. Here we have all of the different layers at play and all of the different partners, including the National Transport Regulatory Authority there at the bottom as well. Municipalities, regions, large companies like Volvo Cars and others, all working together on this thing. Next slide, please.
I'll have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll leave it on this last slide then. So this is actually from the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, mayoral candidate in Seattle. And this is a key thing, you know, it's not enough just to do the pop-up urbanism, of course, the tactical stuff. And that's why us as the national agency, we're trying to turn every single street in Sweden. And that means a completely different participative approach from the ground up that could then scale. And we're working on what would that add up to if you did flip all of those streets in that way across all 290 municipalities we have in the country. So I'll leave it there. There's a kind of a small scale project which has got the DNA of changing the entire country. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thanks. Thanks very much, Dan. And this is really interesting. And as you said, a contrasting approach to looking at the whole citywide scale first, but rather looking at bottom up, a really micro, hyper-local type intervention and the potential of that to change the world. But thank you. Thanks very much. We're monitoring the chat. I don't see any questions yet, whether in the chat or the Q&A. So let me pose one question to all of you and give you just a minute to think about it, to Alvaro and to Nuha and to you. Let me just ask you one thing. You talked about, each one of you talked a little bit about the different sectors, the different departments, the different silos that typically exist in cities and city administrations. What helped you to break those down? Can SDGs be that common language that different sectoral experts and different stakeholders and different actors can use to communicate and to come to some kind of a common understanding and a common vision? Have you seen that, or is it too far-fetched? Let me start with Alvaro, and then I'll go to Nuha and then to you, Dan. So you get a few more seconds to think about the question. Alvaro, do you think SDGs can be that common language between different players who are helping you define these plans?
Sí, bueno, definitivamente nosotros hemos visto a través de los objetivos de desarrollo una guía, ¿no? Una guía primero para tratar de abarcar de manera integral, de manera equitativa entre las más de 300 zonas, 300 barrios que tenemos a través de los más de 600 zonas, 600 barrios que tenemos en el gobierno municipal de La Paz, que tenemos la atribución de manejar. Y en este marco, esta guía nos permite también medir el criterio integral y la articulación y el avance que tenemos que seguir a través de los diferentes parámetros que establecen los ODS de manera equitativa, de manera igualitaria. y por supuesto tener una sociedad cada vez más humana, ¿no? Centrada en un desarrollo integral, no solo respecto al tema de la infraestructura, sino también a través del rescate de las culturas. No olvidemos que La Paz, que Bolivia tiene una característica muy heterogénea respecto a su interculturalidad. Entonces es muy importante para nosotros rescatar lo nuestro, mantener nuestras raíces, mantener nuestra cultura para generar un desarrollo con mayor respeto, un desarrollo con mayor equidad y un desarrollo con mayor igualdad para todos.
Thank you very much. The underpinnings of the SDGs, the fairness, the justice, the equity, really is the common ground. Thank you. Nuha, what do you think? You're muted,
Okay.
Nuha.
Yeah. Actually, it's not an option that using the SDGs as a common language between all sectors. It's not an option anymore after we passed through this crisis, through this 2020 year. So we need a common language, and all sectors should work on that. And actually in my organization at the Greater Amman Municipality, all sectors are working together to achieve these SDGs, even at the national level. If you see or follow up the current projects now, they are all going to achieve these goals. So it's not an option anymore. So now everyone should speak this language, the sustainability language, because the nature actually is calling us. And let me just tell you an experience through the pandemic or through the lockdown in our city, because using cars were prohibited, and all in industrial Amman is not in that industrial city, but all industries are closed and all commercial shops were closed. And we just make a map of testing the air quality by referring to the air quality indexes centers in Amman. And you'll see a big difference in 2 weeks. The air became clean, and you can see birds, you can see pets, and all between residential areas. So the SDGs is a common language between different players, not only in the same organization or in the same country, but all over the world.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nuha. It is no longer an option. This is really music to our ears as UN agencies, the SDG campaign, and all others who strive to position the SDGs as the framework for recovery. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, I think in a way, yes and no, if I can be provocative, as in this, at the government level, of course, we live and breathe the SDGs. They are literally, the office is full of cushions with the SDGs on them. My kids play with footballs with SDGs on them. So they're kind of around us all the time, all over Sweden, I would say. But we worked with New Division, which is the communications agency that worked on the global goals visualization and branding and the language around it. They're based here in Stockholm. And of course, they pointed out there's a real danger that they could just be more silos. They look like 17 goals splitting in 169 sub-goals. And you have to put them together in something to make them work systemically. They don't do that naturally by themselves. So that's why we focus on things like streets, actually, or schools or forests. And we need to find those things, because those are the things that are systems in reality. Those are the things on the ground, and understand that the street is the place where the SDGs happen or not. And that's where the silos happen or not. If you let the street be managed by the traffic department, you get traffic, the clue is in the name. If you let the street be managed by gardeners, you'd get gardens, right? So what you put into that street, which is a complex system, defines what you get out. So all we've done is said, first of all, we pull the system into the room around the street, and we explore what's possible within that. And that's as diverse as possible. And then we map them to SDGs in terms of outputs. What is that new street doing? As you saw in my visualization briefly, you can map that to all of the SDGs, no problem. But we're trying to find that new unit of organization, which is not siloed. It has to be led through the action. And we're surrounded by those systems every day, those everyday infrastructures. They're the things to focus on, not leading with the SDGs, but understand that the SDGs are in the street or in the school or in the port or whatever. And that's maybe that way around might help.
Very interesting, very interesting. Not everybody lives and breathes the SDGs, and it's important to start from where they are looking from.
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
quite important, because otherwise you also risk creating new silos or new ivory towers, if I can use the phrase, which is used for us planners a lot. You can really be looking from a very different perspective. Great perspectives. Thank you very much. I thought that was very, very interesting. I learned a lot. I hope our participants did too. So thank you to all three of you, to Alvaro, Nuha, and Dan for that very exciting discussion. And I hope you will stay with us to the end of the session, of course.
Thank you.
Moving right along, picking up from that discussion around SDGs and cities, and what do SDGs mean in cities, and how can cities tune themselves more towards SDGs? How can they use them as benchmarks? How can they use them as priority setting mechanisms somehow? Or how can they use them as instruments to attract catalytic investments? Let's hear from my colleague, David Aubrey. David works for UN Habitat as an interregional advisor, but most importantly, he's our lead on our new innovative SDG Cities flagship program. And I'd like to now invite him. David, I don't see you on camera, but I'd like to invite David. Yeah, okay, there you are. So I'd like to invite you, David, now to present to us the SDG Cities flagship program, led by UN Habitat, but of course with a huge convening of partners behind it. You have about 5 minutes, and I hope that there will be a few more minutes after that for a Q&A. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So we'll just jump. So the idea here is that I think we all recognize in this meeting the importance of cities to drive SDGs. And what we aim to do here is to promote a collaborative action across the UN system, across local governments, private sector, civil society, different stakeholders, to unleash the potential of cities to accelerate the sustainable development and improve quality of life for all. And we just jump into the fourth slide, perhaps. But we have to do this in a very systematic way. Go back to the next slide, please. And what's key here is we need to have data that needs to link to a strategic planning process, an inclusive strategic planning process. It then needs to consider spatial planning issues, etc. But then that needs to feed the development of projects which will be impactful on people's lives and on meeting the SDG needs, and then ensure that they're financed. And it sounds quite obvious in a way, but so often this chain is broken. Sometimes we develop data, but that doesn't necessarily feed strategic planning. We might develop fantastic plans, but they don't find themselves into projects, or projects don't get financed. So it's about trying to have a systematic way of going from data to impact. And at the same time, in accordance with the New Urban Agenda, building those capacities needed of local government and institutions in those key urban management skills, so that cities can be well managed. And the ambition of this program is to reach 1,000 cities and impact on 1 billion people's lives. And this is just indicative of the scale. Naturally, this is way beyond what UN Habitat will normally do on its own, but we believe that a collective action can achieve this and more. Next slide, please. So how do we do this in a sort of systematic way? I mean, if we consider the SDGs inside this wheel, and each spoke is an indicator, and the hub is a 0 achievement, and the rim is 100% achievement, and we clustered these around social, economic, and environmental dimensions, for instance, we could we could then start looking at where does our city want to be by 2030? we've got 10 years. On one hand, 10 years isn't much time. On the other hand, 10 years is enough time to generate impact. If we can work with our cities, work with the residents of our cities and stakeholders of the cities to really figure out where do we want to be by 2030 and relate these back to SDG targets. And then next slide, if we're able to measure where we are now, then it's that piece between where we are now and where we want to be that is where we need to put our efforts. And this also sounds quite obvious, but all too often we see that the more privileged communities continue to get investment and we leave less privileged communities behind. And this is an attempt to sort of redress that balance and ensure that services are delivered in a more equitable way, in a way that delivers the city's targets for 2030. And this, the next slide, please. And then this gap between where we are now and where we want to be needs to be then translated into actions. Some of these are sort of what we call software, such as legislation. We've been hearing a bit about air quality, for instance, in Oman, housing strategies, public space policies, etc. But also hardware. Some, what are the investments we need? Do we need to build a bus rapid transit, for instance? Do we need to improve our landscaping? What are the investments needed? Next slide, please. So we need now to then systematize how we work, because if we are trying to reach 1,000 cities, there needs to be a systematic way that we can support cities to reach this. So the first stream, next slide, is really around data and action planning, looking at data, generating evidence that can support an inclusive strategic planning process. And what we're doing currently within the UN system is developing a global urban monitoring framework that puts together urban indicators.
David, I've lost your sound. I don't know what is with the others.
As well as the UN Common Country Assessment, so that we all across the globe are working on the same framework. Next, please. And then the next track then is building those key capacities, looking at planning, looking at institutions and governance arrangements and municipal finance strength, so the city can be a strong entity, an entity that can attract investment, etc. And then the next slide, then we talk about project development and investment. And then as we build the capacity, as cities build their capacities to be accountable, reliable partners to investors, we can then see some of the projects that needs to be impacting on SDGs being financed through blended arrangements. And by the way, we're finding as we reach out to more and more banks that they are interested to invest in SDGs. And they are interested in middle income and developing countries as new emerging markets. So we're trying to just see the synergies, and they're very surprising and very promising. And then lastly, back to data, we then monitor and certify the achievements. So we were impressed when UNICEF had their child-friendly schools and maternity wards certification. We want to be able to work with you and look at what certifies progress in cities. Next slide, please. So as we key to this,
I have to ask you to wrap up, David.
Okay, I'll just leave it on this last slide then, please. Next slide. Yeah. So and the next as well. So sorry, previous slide, and I'll leave it at that one. The previous. So the key then is for us to be developing systematized tools across these tracks, so the cities can access very simply excellent tools on data, excellent tools on action planning, online diagnostic tools in terms of the urban management capabilities, and an investment facility. But key also, as well as having all these tools in place, is partnerships, so that the various institutions, local government associations can own this process, utilize these tools amongst their members, so that we can all be pulling in the same direction. This is just a quick vision of what we're doing, Currently, we're building the tools and starting to onboard the first set of cities. Over to you, Shippa. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much. And this really is the perfect bridge between the questions of how to vision and then translate that vision into reality, which is what we're going to talk about in the next panel. And also the very important element of building a vision also based on data, an evidence-based approach to visioning and to realization of that vision. I want to check briefly if there's any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any at the moment. Okay, there is one question. Fabio, typically I wouldn't ask you to type your question in the chat, but in the interest of time, I'll give you the floor. A very brief question, please, to David, I think. You have the floor.
Buongiorno, grazie a tutti. So se mi sentite bene. Io sono un consigliere comunale di un piccolo comune, 20.000 abitanti del centro Italia, in Abruzzo. E vorrei chiedere a Mr. Audrey, noi stiamo immaginando dei modelli, ho sentito anche i relatori precedenti, per delle grandi città e dei grandi agglomerati urbani. Ma secondo lei o secondo i modelli che la vostra organizzazione sta sviluppando, come le città possono guidare lo sviluppo anche dei territori circostanti, includendo anche i piccoli comuni e le piccole realtà, per esempio delle zone interne? Grazie.
Thank you very much for this question. And this is an interesting question because...
David, you're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for this question. When we started to look at this model for Tanzania, looking at 6 cities, the emphasis was, no, please, can you look at the regions? And I think this is very important, to be able to see city regions, and to be able to have a successful way of looking at the linkages between cities, smaller settlements, villages, etc., and seeing that as a whole. So this is a very important point. And indeed, we are also considering SDG regions, so to speak. And there is a lot of demand from our counterparts on that. So I think this is a very important point, and we are working in that direction. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, David. Important to make sure that we reach not only the large agglomerations and the metropolitan areas, but also smaller settlements, peri-urban areas, and communities within cities, really, as Dan was also talking about on a sort of hyper-local scale. Great, thank you. If there are no other questions, we will move right along, because I've been reminded that we are a couple of minutes behind time. So thank you very much, David. And let me segue straight into our next panel, which is really how to translate visions into realities. In this panel, we have a city and regional perspective, and then we have a more of a national perspective, and a global or an international organization's perspective. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists. We have Mr. Bart Tommelin, the Mayor of Ostend, Belgium, and the Chair of the Municipalities in the World Committee of Association of Flemish Municipalities. We have Ms. Norliza Hashim, an old friend of Habitat and an old friend of the planning community, is the Chief Executive of Urbanis, Malaysia. And we have Ms. Gulnara Roll, my colleague from the UN ECE Economic Commission for Europe, the Secretary to the Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management. Welcome, all of you. And again, the rule remains the same, 5 minutes for your initial intervention, and then we'll see if there is any more questions from the floor or from the discussion. Mayor Tommelin, let me start with you. What is the experience of Ostend and of Flemish municipalities in transforming visions into concrete policies? And more generally, how do you see the SDGs supporting strategic planning at the city level. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello from Ostend at the Belgian coast. Dear ladies and gentlemen, for the last five years, local governments in Flanders, with the support of their association VVSG, have been frontrunners in localizing the SDGs. For example, almost 2 of 3 out of 3 municipalities have used the SDGs when developing their new multi-annual policy plans for the period 2020-2025. And I would like to share you with some examples and lessons learned from the Flemish case and my own city of Ostend. With somewhat more than 70,000 inhabitants, Ostend is one of the largest cities in the region of Flanders in Belgium. Together with 19 other municipalities, we took part in a pilot project of the VVSG to localize the SDGs. As part of this pilot, we committed ourselves to use the SDGs when developing our policy plans after the local elections in 2018. To further refine the strategic goals of the city, we developed inspiration sheets for each topic of the coalition agreement, and you can see an example of such a sheet on this slide. Each inspiration sheet contained references to information in the coalition agreement, relevant city data, and the goals and actions regarding the topic in the previous multi-annual policy plan. However, in addition, the relevant SDGs and sub-targets were also included in this sheet. This assured that as a city government, we used Agenda 2030 as a framework for reflection from the beginning when setting out the course of the city for the next 6 years. And we will continue to use the SDGs when implementing and monitoring our local policy, amongst others, through the follow-up of indicators. In addition, we implement concrete initiatives. We, for example, compensate air travel by planting trees in Ostend. We also work on broadening the support base for an awareness on the SDGs, amongst others, by participating in the Week of the Sustainable Municipality, an initiative of the VVSG. And during this week, we celebrate local heroes for sustainable development. This year, we honored the dozens of volunteers of the emergency food distribution. Despite of the health risks, they remained active during the COVID-19 lockdown this spring, and they assured access to healthy and affordable food for vulnerable groups. There are many advantages to integrating the SDGs in the local policy. The SDGs are a common language and a reference point for making more focused long-term decisions across boundaries or political parties. Working with SDGs allows for a more strategic approach to sustainable development, taking it out of the corner of environmental policy. In Ostend, for example, within the administration, it's the policy department that takes the lead on the localizing the SDGs. Further, the SDGs provide an incentive for cross-departmental cooperation to realize the SDGs. You have to bring together different experts and city services in order to cover the 5 pillars of sustainable development. What also motivates our commitment to the SDGs are the bottom-up initiatives. A growing number of actors within the city, such as schools, works with the SDGs. Let me also share with you some lessons learned from the Flemish case. Your SDG story can start small, but in the end, you need leadership at the level of both politics and administration. We have also seen that cooperation between the departments of policy, international cooperation, and communication works well. Further, build on what's already there. Show what the city is already doing that contributes to Agenda 2030, link up with existing processes such as the Covenant of Mayors, city events, or existing policy planning mechanisms. It might help to prioritize some SDGs. This can increase engagement of city services and stakeholders, making it easier to take it into account some specific intervention areas when developing and implementation actions, instead of having to look at all 17 SDGs in detail. I conclude, the most important challenges for the coming years will be to keep the dynamic on the SDGs alive and to keep reflecting on the SDGs when designing, implementing and monitoring local policy. In this, the support of local government associations will remain key. They share knowledge, tools and information on localizing the SDGs. They bring municipalities together to learn from each other and to share good practices from home and abroad. Further, they lobby for local governments to have a seat at the table in intergovernmental mechanisms and strategies on SDGs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Very, very important. I think the big two takeaways for me are the importance of political commitment. I like the way you linked the SDGs to the coalition agreement and the commitments in the coalition agreement. So it's not just the departments or as you said, the administration, but really the politicians see the value in connecting their agendas to this global agenda. And then, of course, the extremely important role of local government associations at the regional level. In Flanders, you said, the collective commitment of local governments across Flanders, but also at the national level, the regional level, and then of course at the global level, as we have seen with the leadership of UCLG. So very much take away those points from your lessons learned from your experience. Thank you very much again. And let me move along to Nurliza. Nurliza, you've heard various perspectives, of course, here today, and Urbanese Malaysia has been a supporter for Asian cities for a very, very long time. Could you tell us a little bit how SDGs are being taken into consideration in Malaysian and maybe more broadly in Asian cities, and how are these visions being transformed into reality? 5 minutes, Nurliza.
Thank you, Shipra. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Nurliza here from Urbanese Malaysia. And I think this discussion on how to translate sustainability vision into reality, I think it's a very important discussion. And it's not as easy as, I hear a lot of interesting stories just now from the very beginning of this session, and some made it really simple, but I think our own journey has been almost 3 years in terms of trying to translate the sustainability vision in Malaysia. Next slide, please. So what we've done actually here in Malaysia is we've introduced the agenda on sustainability to make it a more of a national agenda. Because I think it's not a new agenda for Malaysia. Since 1970s, we've been very committed to the sustainable agenda. This has been translated to a lot of our national documents, planning documents, as well as economic documents. But when the commitment for Malaysia, as long as all other countries, to commit to the Sustainable Development Goals, we looked at how to actually create a common goal and how to make all the agenda that Malaysia has been committed to globally and locally into one universal agenda that could be translated in all documents that we are preparing in the country. So what we did is we introduced the Malaysia SDG Cities, and this Malaysia SDG Cities is a document that we want all our 154 local governments in Malaysia to try to develop at the city level. Because when in our discussion with the national government, we understand that there's a lot of gaps also between the kind of reporting that you could actually do at the national level, as well as the kind of information to achieve some of the targets and indicators that has been set at the national and global level. So the Malaysia SDG cities is actually a document that we want the local government to monitor, to evaluate, and to report on their progress to the national as well as to their sub-national government. And what we've also done is we've linked this tool in terms of making local government more accessible to funding resources. And this is where funding that is supporting sustainable programs, projects, they will be looking at how cities can actually refine their objectives along the pathways of a sustainable agenda. So cities now have started to develop their roadmaps. We are actually at a very initial stage. Out of the 154 local governments that we have, we've only around 10% today, and the target is to do like 10 to 15 or 20 every other year. And so cities are now encouraged to develop these plans, and most importantly is to have that vertical integration between local, state, as well as national. So in this process, we've developed the indicators as well. And this is translating the global indicators. And then we have our national statistics department, which is the national agencies that is also responsible for developing national indicators. So what we've done is try to localize some of that national indicators to the local level. So it has been quite a progress that we've started. And not most important is that we also realize that because Malaysian local government are not autonomous, and based on the Local Government Act, they actually cannot fulfill the whole SDG targets on their own. So only about 70% of the SDGs can actually be implemented at the local level. They have to work with subnational governments and national governments, as well as public and private sector, in order to fulfill the balance of the SDGs. So this is something that is in progress, and we've actually asked them to focus on SDGs which are more closer to the issues that they face on the ground. And in the work that we do in some of the cities, we do find that the plans and programs sometimes mismatch against the actual needs of the people. And this is where engagement, stakeholders' commitment, effective collaboration becomes very important in the process of preparing the SDG reports for the cities. Next slide, please. And what we also wanted is that for them to realize, instead of preparing, because a lot of cities were very, very excited to do a VLR, but we didn't want them to go into a VLR process because we are also afraid that it will be just a one-off reporting for the cities. We wanted to have a program that each cities in Malaysia continue throughout the period, aligning it with their own other blueprints locally. They have all kinds of blueprint actually at the city level. Their strategic plans, which is their budgetary plan, their local plan, which is a regulatory document to plan and develop spatially. So we didn't want them to just concentrate on the VLR. And here, that's why when cities are more ready, then only we encourage them to proceed with a VLR report. And in that way also, we are hoping for a more bottom-up approach, where we are providing inputs to subnational government as well as the national government, which Malaysia is progressively will be reporting at the VNR level. Next slide, please. And some of the work that we also do as a result of partnership with some of the other organizations in Asia Pacific, we actually organized the Asia Pacific Urban Forum last year together with ASCAP as well as UN Habitat. And in that process, we actually formed an alliance called the Penang Platform for Sustainable Urbanization. So today we have an alliance of about 15 partners, and Urbanis is co-chairing the committee. And after 1 year in existence, we just recently launched our Asia Pacific Regional Guidelines on VLR. But most interesting is the alliance itself, because we just realized that so many of us working in the Asia Pacific area, and some of us are actually working in the same areas of in terms of either providing training or providing advocacy in areas of preparing cities in their SDGs. So this alliance now have committed to actually assist one another, especially where some of us are in some of the similar cities. So the commitment for the PPSU this year is to support a few selected cities to prepare their VLR. And also we are working in partnerships actually with a lot of organizations to do this, ESCAP, UN Habitat, UNDP, IGES, CLGF, and even the ASEAN Mayors Forum and so forth. So this has been some, yeah. Actually, this is my last slide. So actually, this has been a good journey for us, and PPSU is just 1 year old. So we hope to, in the ASEAN Asia Pacific region, I think our model is through alliances and partnerships. So thank you very much, Shipra.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting indeed. You have a couple of questions in the chat which we can come back to. So you have a moment to think about them while I go to Gulnara. But a couple of things that I wanted to make a link between what you said and what Mayor Tummalen said before you, which was really start with what you have. He said that very explicitly also. We need to start with what we have, and you also use that as a starting point for the work. And second, none of this is going to happen overnight. It's a long journey, and we have to stay the course. I think this is also an extremely important point that I take away. And the final point, which links us to the next speaker, which is Gulnara, is really about the importance of multi-level governance and the importance of vertical integration. You talked about VNRs, you talked about VLRs. Gulnara, of course, the regional commissions have a very, very pivotal role to play when it comes to voluntary national reviews, when it comes to supporting national governments. But what is ECE doing, and in your experience, what are the other regional commissions doing perhaps to assist cities in that process, to make that multi-level governance link, to assist cities to adopt the SDGs and then to monitor them and to transform them into something concrete at the local level? You have the floor, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Shipra, and thank you so much for the invitation and for the very rich discussion, from which I'm learning a lot. And I agree that the last presentation was exactly a very good bridge. So next slide, please. So just to say that regional commissions, at least UNEC is, it's a platform, neutral platform for 56 member states from global north. So it's Europe, Northern America, and Asia, up to Central Asia. I'm secretary to an intergovernmental committee on urban development, housing, and management, which brings senior government officials, who are dealing with housing, urban development, land management, administration. We have usually our annual meeting where senior governments come together, and in between they are also meeting on different thematic workshops and developing guidelines and conventions. And of course, we're working very closely with other 5 regional commissions, located in different regions of the world. And I also would like to say that, especially in this pandemic time, this cooperation between the UN agencies became really critical, not only with regional commissions, but I think on everyday basis we're working with UN Habitat. But I also would like to thank UN Habitat and UCLG for the very good partnership in the organization of the UN Forum of Mayors that we organized actually on the first day of our intergovernmental meeting. So we had a committee which has senior government officials, and so on the first day we invited all the mayors, and all the program was developed actually in close partnership with UN Habitat, with UCLG and many other UN partners, and also the city networks. Before this Forum of Mayors, actually, we also have also named SDG 11 Day, again, which we co-organized with UN Habitat and Geneva City Hub, which brought 26 city networks. So I think for us, we were extremely excited. And I think this is really a unique opportunity. Many things happened to our friends at the Geneva City Hub. And so all this, I think this cooperation, kind of horizontal international cooperation, is really, really critical. And only in this way we can make a big difference, on ground. What regional commissions are doing to support cities, especially at the pandemic time, I think it's our responsibility. We felt in spring that we should really act. We should do something about this. So the 5 regional commissions, UN Habitat and UN Capital Development Fund, started a project, a global project on building economic resilience during and after COVID-19, which is developing, first of all, diagnostics for 16 cities across the globe to understand what are the economic impacts of the pandemic, and what are possibilities to restart economy, during the pandemics and especially after the pandemic. And UNCDF is providing us a lot of methodology on this, and UN Habitat is providing methodology for mapping and also for the capacity building activities. So I think this project is very important. So in our region, we're working with the cities of Tirana, Bishkek, and Kharkiv in Ukraine, but there are totally 16 cities, and we really see there's lots of interest from many other cities as well. So we'll be really happy to share this experience. UNEC also started a project on addressing the issue of informal settlements. So I think, making a bridge from the Forum of Mayors to this project on economic recovery, I would like to say probably, after this horizontal intergovernmental international cooperation, the second is what was just mentioned was the vertical cooperation. In this project discussions, this is what we see, that cities actually quite limited in what they can do in terms of restarting economies. They need a lot of involvement, the easing regulations for housing, for economic development from the national government. And we hear it for each of our country. We hear it on an everyday basis, how much the national regulations actually affect the economic activities on ground. So definitely this vertical cooperation is something what we're trying to help with. So we're also hoping to have the next discussion at the Regional Forum for Sustainable Development that will have in March. So definitely it will be a very important topic. As my colleague Esteban Leon at UN Habitat is saying, that we're not speaking about best practices yet. We're speaking about experiences. And this is really very important that we team together to really, through these workshops that you are organizing and through many other events, to really understand what methodology is working or not. And what UNEC is also doing together with UN Habitat and with ITU is we're secretariat to the global initiative named United for Smart Sustainable Cities, which brings together 16 UN agencies. And we launched recently a thematic group to discuss methodologies for assessing, evaluating the economic impact of COVID on the economic activities on ground. So next 2 slides, please. And finally, just not to take much of your time, I would like also to stress the topic of data. This is also something we've mentioned. I agree that the issue of volunteer local reviews is coming up very frequently, and we also contacted with many unions, national unions of local authorities, with a big excitement of doing volunteer local reviews. But what we are trying to do, I agree, is that it shouldn't be a one-time effort. So we are working within one of our projects on the Smart Sustainable Cities approach, so that we are using the key performance indicators for Smart Sustainable Cities, which are coordinated already with SDG indicators, but we are really happy to discuss also with other organizations, because there are hundreds of different indicator systems, just to make sure that we're actually using the evidence-based approach measuring the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, but also just making sure that the monitoring of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda SDGs is done using the data. There are not very many activities yet, but we see that, especially in coordination of the DESA, the process is going on. So I think it's very well that it's globally coordinated in the run-up to the High-Level Political Forum. So, and we're really happy to coordinate and work together with everybody. Thank you very much. Back to you, Shipra.
Thank you so much, Gulnara. So important. So many messages coming out, which are very, very similar. A lot of resonance in the room, I think, around the issue of cities are not, going to be able to do this alone. There's a lot of facilitation, barrier breaking required from higher levels of government, a lot of enabling environment, the question of voluntary local reviews, they're linked with voluntary national reviews, and why they should not be a one-time affair, but also, something that becomes normalized as part of the policy planning process. Only then they remain relevant. Thanks very much. I think those are very, very important. And your final point, I think the biggest point for us is, we talk about coordination, horizontal, vertical, but the high-level international horizontal coordination, extremely important among the different international actors, particularly in the UN. Thanks. Very quickly, because we're running out of time, I will take up the 3 questions, 2 questions in the chat and 1 comment. I think the both questions are to you, Nurliza. One is on indicators. We heard the issue about indicators come up again. When you are developing the indicators, do you also set concrete targets, or do you leave it to local governments to set their own targets? I think there's an important question that perhaps I would also like the others to pitch into. And then the second is about incentivization for local plans. But perhaps the target question is a bigger one. If you can take that, very good.
Okay. Yeah. So for us, what we did with the indicators is nationally we also have target set. We have like unemployment target set, housing targets. We even have carbon emission targets at the national level. So in the first level, we try to encourage the local governments to translate the national targets also locally. But at the same time, some cities, just sub-national governments also have set some targets for them, So, but where targets are not available at the local level, we encourage them to actually do a gap analysis. And that's where the indicators are not just quantitative. We also have a set of indicators which are also qualitative. I think the whole idea is to encourage the local councils and local government to start to develop some level of collating information, understanding what their needs are, and assessing their long-term plans to achieve the sustainable agenda. So that's why our targets and indicators are actually in a way quite broad and both qualitative and quantitative at the same time. And on the local government side, yes, we do ask them to actually align their local plans with the SDGs. And we are very actually fortunate because the ministry also regulate local plans through our Federal Department of Town and Country Planning. So we work very closely with them. And incentives are currently through budgets, where local governments are incentivized further through the development budgets that they applied from the federal government, and projects which are more SDG related or compliance will have a better chance to get the budgets. And in terms of legal framework, we are now discussing, actually we are in the midst of amending our Town and Country Planning Act, and there's a big discussion. A lot of people in our engagement are asking us to, to be more firm in terms of ensuring sustainability agenda is put in very firmly in the legal framework. So it's still in discussion, and we are not sure how the wordings will be because we still want, regulatory frameworks. I think needs to be slightly more flexible also at some time.
Great, thank you. I think the incentivization and eventually leading to a regulatory framework, perhaps when the incentivization has already worked to bring people on board. That's more of the approach here. Thank you. There is an extremely important comment and reflection in the chat on the VLRs, that the VLRs cannot be a one-time effort, and the experience of the city of Ghent, where in 2020, they've started with an overview of indicators for the 17 SDGs, and in the next years, they will use it to have discussions on particular thematics and generate particular reports, people, prosperity, planet, etc., highlight good practices. And in 2024, they will do another report on the full 17 SDGs as a VLR, a very interesting approach. And we might reach out to you, to the city of Ghent, to understand this a bit more and work with you. My colleague Martino is in charge of that. So thank you very much. I don't see any other questions in the chat or any other requests from the floor. And we are very close to the end time. So let me quickly try and sum up. Gosh, how difficult is it to sum up such a rich discussion? But I will use maybe a shortcut, maybe a keywords and key phrases method to sum up this conversation. What did I hear out of this? I think starting with saying that indeed the SDGs can be a common language and reference frame, but you have to start with systems that people identify with, that resonate with people's lives and their daily needs and priorities, and not just, the SDGs as an abstract notion. We heard from several people about the importance of data and the importance of evidence-based policy formulation and evidence-based action. That came out quite strongly. We heard also, I think from every single one of the panelists, that how long and complex this journey can be, and the importance of staying the course. We heard about the importance of multi-level governance and vertical integration, not just horizontal. We all talk about bringing a lot of stakeholders together at the city scale, but we're really talking about from hyper-local to national to international and all the scales in between, the importance of everybody doing their part, because not one level can resolve these issues or achieve the sustainable development goals alone. The importance of starting with what you have also came out quite strongly in a number of presentations, and the absolute criticality of political commitment in this process, whether it is an individual mayor or whether it is an association of mayors, or it is the world federations, the global networks of local governments and the political mobilization. The political commitment to the SDGs is an absolutely fundamental imperative if we have to realize these visions and convert them into reality. And I want to leave you with a final thought, which is which is my takeaway, that the common language of sustainability, of fairness, of equity, of justice, a lot of you said it, but Alvaro said it best, this common language, Nuha said it, is not a choice anymore. This is not a choice. We cannot bounce back to an old reality. We have to bounce forward to a more just, to a more sustainable, to a more resilient, to a more fair and equitable future. And this is really what the SDGs are about. On that note, I would like to hand over to my dear friend Diana Lopez, who has some information on very exciting bonus elements for you as part of this Venice City Solutions Jamboree over these 2 days. Diana, the floor is yours. And thank you all very much from me for this very interesting session.
Thank you so much, Shipra. And this is the moment when everybody will clap and we'll have the room full of energy and ideas. And then we will go for a coffee break, which is always the most interesting part of the event. So now we invite participants to leave your square boxes of the rooms where you are and go out in the streets of Venice. Our local partner, AICRE, has prepared wonderful videos that will take you to Venice, to its people, to its communities, to do how people live in these extraordinary cities, also so full of challenges. So you will see some of the challenges on some of the Joyces of Venice in these videos. So we invite you to go and see the videos that have been produced by ICRE and the local partners, which are the Ca' Foscari University of Venice, the Studium group, and of course our partner Lavazza, who has prepared very special coffee breaks for this event. Then you have also available the one-on-ones interviews with Francesca Lavazza, with Priyanka Sinha, with Tatiana Bilbao, and with Marlene Simon. So we had 4 keynote speakers, and the 4 were women on this occasion. Just technically, you will have the videos in the YouTube channel. We had some problems with the subtitles, and we wanted to make sure that everybody had subtitles, so we changed the link a couple of times. So my question is, just go to the YouTube channel and click on the videos. So disregard the agenda because it has some technical, you know, we're all experimenting with this. So thank you very much, and we'll start the session at 3. The channel, the Zoom channel remains open, so you can enter and exit in this same link from Zoom. Thank you very much.